this episode of Getting Your Ducks in a Row, I speak to RHS Gold Medal winner Ruth Marshall, Director of Cool Gardens, to explore her fascinating career journey from geologist to high-end landscape designer. Ruth shares how her background in geology and a decade in the city helped her to approach business and problem solving in the landscaping world. We cover a range of topics, from the importance of integrating garden design into architectural planning and the challenges of working with clients on large-scale projects, to the future of landscaping and the impact of new biodiversity net gain regulations on the industry. Let's get into it. Morning, Ruth. Welcome to the show.
Good morning. Hi.
How are you?
Yeah, good on this lovely, bright, sunny day.
Yeah, it's beautiful, beautiful, lovely, crisp day. A day of the first day, I think, for a while that hasn't rained. So, yeah, that's positive. Thank you for joining us, Ruth. If we could just start off, if you could give us a bit of a rundown and background into your journey, sort of where you started in the industry, the various sort of paths you've taken, your experience, and that's led to where you are now.
So I've been in the industry 25 years now, which is a bit terrifying. I actually trained as a geologist. And it was a standing joke when you were in geology that people working on rocks less than 25 million years old were snobbishly known as gardeners. And I have now become a gardener, having been one of the snobs that didn't work on rocks less than 25 million years old. So that's somewhat poetic. I did a degree in geology from Oxford. I did a PhD in Cambridge, and came out of that in the early 80s, which was the oil price crash. And nobody wanted geologists at that point. And similarly, having spent 3 months on my own in a desert in the middle of nowhere, I realized that working as a exploration geologist, which sounds like a great title, was really not me. I was literally in a caravan in the middle of nowhere for 3 months and on my own, hideous. So went into the city, which was obviously boom time for the city in the early 80s, and spent 10 years as a management consultant, which was kind of exactly what all the stories of the city in the 80s were like. It was mad. We were working all the hours that God gave. I cancelled every holiday I ever booked. We worked through the night. We went to champagne bars at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, sunk a load of bottles, and then went back to work. Were ordering in takeouts from the Ivy at 1 a.m. It was absolutely mad, great fun. But I spent 10 years learning a lot about business, learning a lot about how to get up to speed with things very quickly, and interpreting complicated data and what people needed, and analysing markets. And having spent 10 years really in that massive striving, I want to be a partner, got to be a partner, sat at the table, looked around at my fellow partners and just thought, what am I doing here? This is terrible. This is a barren environment to live in.
I've had enough of takeaways from the Ivy at 1 a.m.
Absolutely. And cancelling every holiday you've ever had. That is, quite fun when you're in your early 20s, and all feels very exciting, but it's no way to live. So took a sabbatical. I took a 1-year sabbatical to retrain as a garden designer, which was wonderful. Met some amazing people and had a lovely time. Working at the Picard School of Design, which was then based at the Museum of Garden History, which is just an amazingly inspirational place to be. Decided that was much more interesting, if much less remunerative than working in the city. So chucked the job in and started designing. So that's how I got to be a designer. I started off working at my desk in my home office with a baby in a basket under the desk.
Wow.
We literally landed our first, I would say, then big job. I think a week after my eldest was born, and went to bed having discussed it with my husband, saying, no, we're going to turn it down. Absolutely, it's the right thing to do. We're going to turn it down. And woke up in the morning and rang up the client, said, yep, we're
I'm
on.
doing it, yeah. As you do, right?
And that really was, I think that was kind of the pattern, at least for the next 10 years of our whole attitude was, we can do anything. We'll do what it takes. We'll do anything. We'll take on anything exciting, anything new, anything different, or anything anyone wants, really. And that could be, we ended up doing anything outside. So that might have been building, obviously all the normal garden stuff, but it was also, we built an extension. We built a glass box extension. We've built dog kennels. We've built rivers, streams, lakes, all of which we knew absolutely nothing about when we started. But we had a can-do attitude, and ultimately, if it went wrong, we fixed it. And that's how we built the business.
I think you have to. I think if you're going on your own, you're starting your own business, particularly at the beginning. I mean, you had a baby as well, just mixed in with all of that, right?
Joy.
Yeah, I mean, it's you have to have that attitude, and sometimes it's a bit of a fly by the seat of your pants type experience.
Oh, completely.
But I think everyone goes through that, and I think it's almost your test to see whether you've got what it takes and you've got the skills that are required.
Yeah. And it's the consulting background that I think sets you up well for that, and doing a PhD similarly. That when you're in consulting, if the client says jump, you literally are saying how high. If we've all got to be here all night, if we've got to cancel our holidays, if we've got to be here all weekend, tough. And that is very ingrained, and actually suits me. I'd much rather work like that. And that filters through into, if you're on a landscaping job and something goes wrong, if there's a deadline, particularly for shows, if there's a tight deadline, you just do it, and you recruit people who just do it.
Yeah.
And the attitude is, if we've got to do this, we will find a way to do it. And if the tree's too heavy to lift and the crane's locked out and you can't do it, we will find another way to do it.
Yeah. Well, I think you've sort of summed it up quite nicely there, in the sense that you've got your academic skills, shall we say, because there's a being book smart and just sort of streetwise, should we say that, they're two very different things. They're both forms of intelligence, right? And I think where you've got your degree in geology, and then you went and worked in the city and had that experience of dealing with people and understanding the nuances of client relationships and just sometimes just getting stuff done. I think that business acumen, shall we say, when you put those together, that's quite a powerful combination, I think. Why geology, out of interest?
That's a good question. I think I have a liking for the new and different, and I think the geology was something that you don't do at school. I didn't want to go and do physics or maths or art, which were sort of things that I enjoyed at school. And I literally picked up a leaflet somewhere talking about geology. I thought, oh, that sounds exciting. I'd always done trips with my parents in Cornwall and Scotland and seen rocks that looked interesting and nice shiny crystals and things. I thought, oh, that sounds fun. So, you turn up, all the other people that turn up at university have had, 6-7 years of doing their subject before they start. Whereas all the geologists turn up and it's like, we know absolutely nothing about this. We might have some vague interest, and there were some terribly clever people who obviously knew an awful lot more than I did. But it was just fun. And we were the one group of people who, a year into our courses, were still really excited by them because we hadn't had 6 years of it beforehand. And it's this really fast learning curve.
Yeah, I mean, it's to go all the way to PhD as well. I mean, you must have been really invested in that, right?
Yeah, I mean, To some extent, it was just what's the next thing. I
Sure.
really enjoyed doing my degree. It was great, and obviously being in Oxford is an amazing privilege. It's just a stunning place to be. And I thought, well, how can I have 3 more years of this, or 4, as it turned out? Um, I know I'll apply to Cambridge, and actually for both Oxford and Cambridge, I never thought in a million years I would get in. And it's one of the um, little insights into both of those universities that when you're in your first week there and you're having all those conversations of what did you do for your A levels, did you have a gap year, you know did you always want to come here? 90% of the people there say, I had no idea I would ever get in. I didn't think, and we all had imposter syndrome. I had that for sort of the 7 years I was there, I think. So it was great fun, but I wasn't. I thought that I wanted to work in geology because the idea of being an exploration geologist sounded like a brilliant title. And the stark realities of living on your own, excuse me, in a caravan in the middle of nowhere don't really quite occur to you. So yeah, I mean, I was sort of invested in it, but it wasn't. It was more the journey that was fun.
Yeah, yeah, I see that. I mean, yeah, I can understand how that actually Oxford and Cambridge. I worked in the legal sector before I started this business and doing what we're doing now. In a similar sort of role, if you like, I was sort of sales, business development, marketing, but just in legal. And so most of my peers, anyways, put it that way, and colleagues were Oxford or Cambridge, and which, yeah, I mean, I think as well, it's access to perhaps a bit of a different world, and I think there's a lot to be said for that. It's different circles and I mean, like most universities are, right? You're getting to mix with a
Absolutely.
variety of people. That's
And you
interesting.
have to remember it's not real life.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah.
thing, and the Oxford terms are really short. You have 3 8-week terms a year. It's really, really short. So you sort of go up to Oxford, you spend 8 weeks there, and then you come out of it, and it's like you've been kidnapped. It's like, oh my goodness, I'm now in a completely different world.
Yeah. So tell us more about your current business. What your landscaping journey. What sort of projects you work on? What are your services? That sort of thing.
Um, yeah. So obviously, from starting out, we'll do anything for anyone. That gets a bit refined over time. We basically have three main businesses. We do landscape design, um, high-end landscape design, which is for almost anyone who has got a design-led project. It's largely domestic. We do some commercial, but it's largely um, people who are wanting to completely redesign the garden. There will be some little planting jobs and little bits and pieces that we do, but the majority is around either new builds or extensions where people have trashed the garden or are going to trash the garden. So the whole thing's got to be redone. And we have a wonderful design team led by a couple of amazing landscape architects who help us to interpret what the client wants. And often we are working alongside architects. So if you've got an architect who's got a regular stream of clients on new builds and extensions, that's a great place for us to start working with them to help them get a view of the overall project. I am amazed by the number of people that will do a new build or an extension without thinking about, well, I've got these huge glass doors that look straight out onto this. Oh, it's a mud pile.
Yeah.
And it is genuinely astonishing when you look at a lot of the architects' portfolios and you look at their amazing pictures of their wonderful extensions, all of which nowadays have these huge glass doors, and they're just looking out onto, a shoddy fence or the manhole covers, and trying to get the design thought of at an early stage, even if they're not going to do it all at that stage, just makes so much sense. I never cease to be amazed that they don't do it.
Mm,
So we basically design in full 3D often it's the first time they've even seen their house in 3D, because it's still the case that quite a lot of architects don't actually do full 3Ds. So being able to show a client, well, when you're standing at your kitchen sink or when you're sitting in your lovely lounge, this is what it's going to look like.
Yeah, this is what you'll see. Yeah,
And
quite
thinking about
powerful.
it's really powerful, and there are so many things that don't get thought about in terms of levels. So, the architects designed this great house, and to come in under the planning regulations, they've actually dropped the house to keep the roof level at the height of whatever's just been knocked down. Nobody's thought about the fact that that requires them to have retaining walls all the way around the side of the house, and that they're going to be stepping up from the back of the house into the rest of the garden, which not only from a design point of view creates opportunities and challenges, but also from a practical point of view of drainage, can be a massive issue. And you've got these, again, gorgeous bifold doors at the back of your house, and you're looking straight out onto a retaining wall. So that's the majority of the design work. So lovely creative design, but often around big building projects, not only. We also have in-house landscaping, because I am very much a believer in how does a designer actually design something if they don't know anything about how it's going to be built. And we see and get a lot of design projects and build projects that have been designed by a very lovely designer who's done something that looks beautiful, but has no idea how it's going to be built. The client has no idea what it's going to cost. And frequently, the client absolutely falls off their chair when they were expecting to spend £150,000, which feels like a huge budget, and it's come in at 300. And then they're going back to the designer saying, well, what are you going to do about it? And they're going, well, what do you mean? You've got a design that you really like. And it's like, well, yeah, but I can't do anything with it.
Money is an object here. I do have a budget.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, working with both design and landscaping, I think it's not essential, because there are ways around it, but for us, we think that's the best way. So, our designers sit, I'm pointing over there, the other side of the barn, with the landscaping project managers. They are constantly asking, they're sitting at their desks working on a 3D model, and they'll say, oh, how would you do this? Or can I build a step like that? Or does that work? Which I think's a fantastic way of working. And it also means when we come to the costing as part of our design process, we have a stage that is budget costings, and that isn't us just doing this and chucking it at the client. It's us getting our in-house QS, who's one of my business partners, to cost the whole thing. We then sit down with the client and take them through the design and the costs together. And then when they fall off their chairs, which they almost invariably do, you can say, okay, so now what are we going to do? We can take this out, we can move this, we can shift this, we can do this differently. What would you like us to do? We can make lots of suggestions, and they will be different if we just want to shave off as much as possible. That's a very different conversation from we need to halve it.
Yeah.
Halving it is starting the design again or making radical changes. Shaving 10% off is often just miss out this bit, or take out the pergola, or take out the outdoor kitchen for the moment.
So it's, that one of the sort of myths I wanted to dispel here in my conversation with you is, I think when people, hear landscape, they think, oh, someone that lays turf and does a bit of weeding, but this is a full service with various different teams working together to provide something that, one, is, meets and I think exceeds your expectations. Because the reason I say that, we're a large part of what we do is design, and when we speak to clients and we take their brief from them, we sit down with them, what they inevitably, if you're not in design or you whatever, you don't have that sort of mindset, what you think looks great most of the time probably won't. I think it's a general rule, but I have to explain to them why.
Well, and showing, that's why the 3Ds are so important, that, quite often, you'll get a new designer will come in and sort of say, oh, they want to do this and that look like absolute rubbish. And I don't want to do it. It's going to take me ages. It's like, just do it. Put it on the 3D and show them. You sitting there for ages, it's going to take you more time to explain to them why that won't work and why the geometry doesn't work and why the steps can't go there and this can't go there and you can't have your paddle caught in the middle of this because it's too big. Just show them on the 3D. And it is the brilliant thing about SketchUp in particular, because it's such a flexible program. You can sit there with the model on a laptop, and when they say, but can't that go over there? And you can move it over and say, look, that's why it's not over there. That looks terrible. Exactly, the whole experience of design is around exciting people. And I would say 9 times out of 10, when you show somebody their house on a 3D, even if it's not a full photo rendered version, they're suddenly really excited.
Yeah.
They're excited. They're looking at it going, oh, and the people who came into it going, oh, I just want a bit of, quite often there's a split between 2 partners. One will want something, is really only interested. Let's be honest, it's the man cave, and it's I want as big a lawn as possible, and I want to be able to get my mower through. And the other half is, I want it to look pretty, and I want, this is terrible stereotyping, but I'm afraid it is true. I want it to look pretty, and I want lots of colour, and I want lots of scent. And when you show them it on a model, they're all going, oh, that's amazing. Oh, what happens through there? And oh, that would be great. Oh, and the kids would love that.
Yeah, I think we had some work done in our garden. Spring last year, we had an outbuilding basically converted into like an office and gym area, and we had our patio redone and some fencing and just a bit of a remodel. And before, the last time I when we moved, just to frame it a bit better. So we moved into our house in 2013, I think. And it was like a 1970s time warp. We bought it from an elderly couple. They probably hadn't decorated in about 30 years. And it was literally like walking into like a 1970s house, right? So we had a lot of renovation to do inside. And the garden, because, we had a budget, everyone does. So we prioritised the inside. And the garden, it was the guy who lived there before, he had everything he'd done himself. And it was actually really quite interesting, and the way he'd done it was quite impressive. He'd obviously put years and years and years of time and effort into this. And at the back of the garden, I've got quite a long garden, but it's fairly narrow. And at the back of the garden, he had a self-built greenhouse. He had an allotment area, had a little gardening shed, a little hedge with sort of a storage section behind it, so you couldn't see it when you were looking out. And then it's there were 2 sort of flower beds, that sort of cut into the grass, and almost created a gateway into the allotment area. And then there was a grass area, but there was no patio. So long story short, for maintenance, I genuinely tried to keep the allotment, but I just couldn't. I didn't have the time. Young kids.
Doesn't work for most people.
It was so hard, I had kids come along, and I always have very fond memories of an allotment, because my granddad used to have his own allotment. He'd grown his sort of own fruits and vegetables in his garden and stuff, and I wanted to try and carry that on, but I just didn't have the time, right? So anyway, we basically turfed the whole thing, and then I built self-built with my dad a very small patio on it. And that was it for years, until we finally got to a point where our kids grew up a bit, and we would spend a lot more time in the garden. I like barbecuing. I love all of that. I like sort of fire pit and all the rest of it. And we realised that we spend obviously when the weather's good, as much time outside as we do inside.
Yes.
And we've invested next to zero time, attention, resources into where we spend a lot of our time. And we had a guy come round, and he was a landscaper, and he's the guy who ended up doing the bits and bobs that we had done. And it's one of the best investments I've made in my property, is having an area outside that both my other half and I and my kids can genuinely enjoy, and it's built for us, and what was actually delivered, like you were saying there about, he didn't have the 3D design stuff, he would sort of do drawings and things. And seeing, you know, you give your ideas. This is what we're thinking. This is what we'd like. We'd like it easy to maintain and all X, Y, and Z. But the things that he brought to it, we've got these two flower beds and these wooden sculptures that sort of come out through our patio. It just makes a huge difference. Yeah. And they are things, even though we're in design, different design, things I'd never have thought of.
Yeah.
And it really, as I say, one of the best investments I've made in my house.
And it is, you know, it's for the same reason that I used an interior designer to help me with my house. That I can draw it all up, and I draw it, I draw it up in 3D, and I can look at it. But I end up like a rabbit in the headlights with an interior, because I can't really decide. Whereas outside, I have a much more certain. I know when something's right. You know, I can design something and I know when it's right. Inside, you know, I've got lots and lots of ideas, and they're kind of all nice, but they're probably all conflicting with each other. And I think that's where a lot of our clients are. And, you know, as you say, it's one of the massive trends over the last few years post lockdown, is people are much more aware of the fact that their outside space is precious. You know, there's been a massive increase in people wanting studios and outdoor pergolas and outdoor kitchens and much more genuine entertaining space. And, you know, exactly as you said, I mean, we always laugh that, you know, the most common phrase that people give us when we're starting work is, I've spent so much money on the house, I haven't got much left to spend on the garden. And, you know, we completely understand it, of course, because we all do it in that order. Of course you would. But actually trying to educate people that, particularly when they're building a house or an extension, at least planning the garden at the same time is the more cost-effective way of doing it. Because otherwise what tends to happen is you've got a mud pit outside, so you chuck a patio down because you've got to have something to step out onto. It's made in the wrong material, in the wrong shape. You're throwing money away. At least if you've got a design in place, you can have that done the way you want it. It doesn't cost any more to lay 100 square meters of paving in the right shape, in the right place, than it does to just chuck it down as a rectangle at the back of the house. So you might as well do it properly. And then you know that that's going to stand the test of time. That's going to be consistent with your overall vision for your garden.
It's exactly what I did, Ruth. What you've just said there, I just thought, you know what, just do that and it'll be fine. And I wasted a fair amount of time and money. If I'd planned it properly and given it some thought, it would have been far more cost efficient. Absolutely. So tell us about the accolades that you've earned, most notably your RHS Gold Medal.
Hang on a minute.
Have you got it? Ah, there we are.
They sit in there. Yeah, very exciting. So we first did Chelsea in 2006, I think, a long while ago, and that for men cap. And that was a real case of you don't know what you don't know. And that was quite a learning experience. We got a silver medal, which was amazing. We learned a huge amount, and particularly at that time, I think Chelsea was very much I mean, I hesitate to call it an old boys club, but it was very much. There was a lot. There was a lot in the judging and how it all worked that was definitely under the surface. You know, you didn't know if you weren't a Chelsea regular, and it took us years of being Chelsea regulars. We spent years building for other people at Chelsea to kind of get under the skin of that. It is now a lot more transparent. And in 2013. We cooked up. It was very us. We did a nursery visit to a fabulous nursery in Germany, which we typically do each year with the design team, to go and look at amazing trees and amazing topiary and all sorts of wonderful things over a couple of days. And I found 4 wonderful trees. They were umbrella-form corylus, which is a nut tree, absolutely beautiful. And on the plane on the way back, sketched how I could use these in a design that might be something that we could submit for the RHS shows. And we'd missed the deadline for Chelsea, so I submitted it. We knew the show manager at Hampton Court because we'd built for another designer the year before. And I literally just emailed her when I got off the plane and said, "You got any slots going? Because I've got this great design. I think it would be brilliant." We were months after the deadline, but they do sometimes slots become free for one reason or another. And she emailed straight back and said, "Yeah, we might have. Do you want to put the design together properly and we'll get it reviewed?" And I think 2 weeks later we were in. So we designed it, we built it, and we built this gorgeous spa garden, which was loosely based on something we were doing for a client. And we got the gold medal, which was amazing. Absolutely the highlight of my career. And we also got the best in show for that category, the summer gardens, which is the little vase thing that you can probably see behind me, which was presented in this amazing ceremony. So yeah, really, really exciting, and it's what my business partner always called it. It's the Olympics of gardening.
Yeah,
You know, you
absolutely.
have to have the gold medal if you're going to, play in the game that we play. It's the badge of honor. It's the, oh, okay, you're all right. It doesn't actually get you any business, but what it does is it gets you to the table. It gives you an opportunity to talk to people about what you can do. It demonstrates not only a level of skill in design, and in our case in construction, but the fact that you can work to a deadline.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, it's a very different business if you've got to finish, by midnight on Friday night.
Yeah.
And it's got to look perfect.
Well, that's a huge part of it, right? And I think that sometimes I don't think enough weight's put to it, and in terms of the business side, because it's all well and good designing great stuff, and we have a similar thing here, right? It's all well and good designing stuff that looks great and is functional and ticks all of those boxes, but it also needs to be delivered in a timely fashion because it needs to do all of that, but then the client then needs to be able to use it.
Absolutely.
And that's a big part of it.
It is, and it is a challenge for us always that there's got to be some give and take on a construction project. Everyone knows construction projects always run over. When you're working outside, yes, that does happen, and people need to understand that there is a different approach and cost to a project that has a drop dead date to one that you are just trying to do in as timely fashion as possible. So if you are building a garden, as we have done on many occasions, for a function or a wedding or a party of some kind, that's got a drop dead date. If they haven't got going early enough, which they frequently haven't, there is likely to be some extra cost attached to that at the end, because if a delivery using the normal logistics flow of the industry doesn't turn up on time, or somebody lets you down, or somebody has a van breakdown, or something goes wrong, or you have a monsoon, or as happened to us, literally a herd of horses galloped across the newly laid lawn 2 days before the wedding. I mean, they did. They jumped a fence and galloped across the lawn.
Did they go across the lawn in a straight line, or did they sort of meander?
It was all over the place.
Oh,
it
wow.
was all over the place. If these things happen, they can always be fixed, but there's a significant cost to doing it.
Yeah, I think construction projects are. I think as well. There are variable factors, but the clients. The client has a part to play in that as well, right? If they dump on you a load of extra changes, or I don't actually like this or I don't like that, then that obviously adds to it, right?
And it is all the time. I mean, one of the big differences between our work and often for a house builder is that quite a lot of the time, and probably 60% of our projects, the client is actually living there. So they're often already fed up with builders by the time we even start, as are their neighbours. They're fed up with the mess, they're fed up with the noise, they've had enough. So they're already grumpy before they can start. They've usually already spent all their money and a bit resentful about the fact that they're having to spend probably a lot more than they were expecting on the landscaping. And however lovely we are and however lovely our guys are, there will be noise, there will be mess, and there will be errors. So that is definitely a challenge. And the clients, God love them, are all, most of our clients are great, normal people who have good days and bad days. And, some of them have got great vision, some of them haven't. I have only ever once we are on, I think, project 950 something now. And in all that time, I think I have only ever once had a client who has agreed the design, agreed the costings, said go, and left us to do it without a comment. That it never happens. And they were amazing clients. They loved the garden. They were really happy with it, but they did not change anything at all during the process, and they just left us to get on with it, and that
Sounds
never
like a
happens.
unicorn.
Yeah, it never happens.
I wish I could find a client like that. No disrespect to any of my clients that are listening. I love you all.
No, well, exactly. And I wouldn't be that client either. So I don't expect, I don't expect our clients to, but, I always used to say as well to people when you're showing them the first bill of quantities, the first set of costings, look, nobody ever looks at these and goes, oh yeah, that's all right then. We don't expect you to, it's fine. This is your decision-making process. If you were talking about furnishings, at least most people have an idea, because we all go to shops, of what things cost. You know what a sofa costs. You know how different the cost would be if you go to IKEA versus if you go to Heels, if it still exists, versus if you have something made bespoke. You know the difference in those, and you've got some sense in your head of where that would come from. We don't know that for landscaping. Nobody knows what a patio costs or installed fencing, and you get a bit skewed. I mean, fortunately, the impact of ground force is now dissipating because it's disappeared into the annals. But for a very, very long while, we were stuck with people effectively saying, well, I saw them do this for 500 quid on ground force. And it's like, but that was entirely fictitious. You cannot build a garden for that. And that's been one of the ongoing challenges for us. I think it is getting a little bit better. People are getting cannier, and also we are putting out much, much, much more specific information on costings, and people are actually reading it. And that has helped quite a lot, because the number of projects that you would go into where people were hoping that they could get a significant garden built for, say, £20,000, and that garden would be 170, and that's quite a long way to manage someone's expectations. However open and honest and frank you are, it is very difficult for people to not come away feeling cross with you because you've destroyed their dream, or you've made them feel a bit silly.
Yeah, it's a very difficult balance to find, and line to walk down, I think. So, Ruth, what do you see? Where do you see the future of the landscaping business going, like as a sector?
I'm actually very optimistic. I mean, I think if you'd asked me this question about a year ago, you might have got a very different answer, not just from me, but from absolutely everyone. And I'm sure you've heard this all over the place. I mean, certainly at Chelsea last year, we sat with our good friends from Blue Forest who do tree houses, and we were sat on one of their lovely display tree houses, and we're all talking about, what a challenging few years it had been. I think Brexit and lockdown were pretty catastrophic for the landscaping industry. Lots of good contractors went bust. It was immensely challenging. Everything just stopped. not just the work, but projects, everything coming up. I mean, our design team actually kept working through lockdown because they were all working remotely, but pretty much everything else stopped. So it was difficult. And last year we expected it all to kind of go, and it just didn't. We had lots and lots of projects on the books, which were all kind of ready to go, but just didn't. And that's kind of what everyone was saying, that there was everything was very sticky. I think there was a lot of anxiety about governmental changes and legislative changes, and just the minute people start getting anxious, obviously for landscape, it's an entirely discretionary spend. If you're building your house, you've probably got to get on and build it. But if you've got a huge landscaping project, maybe you'll just hold off. So that has really changed in the last 6 months. We've probably had the busiest December and January that we've ever had in terms of inquiries coming in. Normally that's really quiet for us, and the phones don't start ringing until the first sunny day. But it's been busy. We've had lots of inquiries, so that's very positive. Looking further afield, I'm actually quite optimistic. There's a lot to do. There's some pent-up demand from the last year or two. There've been some planning changes, and although planning remains an issue for everyone because it's so slow, the government introduced a biodiversity net gain requirement in April of last year for all new builds. There are some exceptions, but pretty much all new builds. And what that means is that if you are putting in planning permission for a new build house, you have to demonstrate how you are going to improve the biodiversity on that plot by 10%.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
And not only do you have to show a landscaping plan that shows that, you have to show that you have considered various mitigation strategies first to prevent any destruction of habitat. You then have to show exactly how you are going to improve the habitat, and there's a very complicated series of formulae that you can work out, or you get people like us to work out for you. But the real sting in this is, A, you won't get planning permission without it. It has to be there. It's a requirement. And B, once you have signed up to that plan, you are committed to that for 30 years. It is a legal requirement for 30 years. So if you achieve your net gain by saying, oh, that's fine, we'll put a wildflower meadow at the back of the property with no intention of ever doing it, at any time in the next 30 years, you can be stung for that. You have to do it. And we thought there would be this massive upsurge of people realizing this, and all of a sudden we can do a biodiversity net gain plan as part of our design process. We just have to bring the design process a bit earlier in the whole thing. And I've been surprised that there has not been as much uptake of that as I would have expected. It might just be because it's taking a long while to filter through, and a lot of people don't know anything about it. But it's a big deal. If you've got a big new build going on, you need to have delivered that to get your planning permission, and you are committed to implementing that and maintaining it. And it'll be a condition as part of your sale. It'll be, if you build something thinking, later I'm going to be able to put a studio there and a swimming pool there. You can't do that if you're committed to having your wildflower meadow there, or your tree belt, or your additional hedgerow. So that's quite a big thing that I think is bubbling under in terms of its impact on the industry.
Absolutely. So that plan, so that when you go through that process and you're held to account over the next 30 years, presumably that's passed from developer down to resident, down to the homeowner, right?
It's the homeowner.
Yeah, and they have to maintain that.
They have to maintain it.
It's
We
interesting.
don't know, nobody knows how it's going to be enforced.
Mm.
And, there are schemes available for people to effectively, a bit like carbon trading, you can effectively kind of buy a net gain
Okay.
somewhere else. But A, that's very expensive, and B, they can refuse your planning permission if you have not demonstrated that you can't do it on your site. So this is part of actually quite, I mean, it's a really good thing
Mm.
in that, this is about local habitats, and it's about habitats. It's not about bat boxes and, badgers. The local habitat's important. So you have to first and foremost show how you've mitigated against destruction of habitat. Then you've got to show how you are going to specifically improve it nearby. If and only if you can't do it on that particular site, are you allowed to go and buy credits elsewhere?
Wow. That is, I hadn't heard of that. So I think it's a case of raising awareness, Ruth. I think, I think there's a lot to be said for sometimes, the world that needs to catch up a bit.
Yeah.
That is interesting. So
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like there's a lot going on in your space. How do you see that sort of, impacting the business and evolving the business, shall we say?
I mean, it feels like it's been a whirlwind of change. We have only this year um, gone back to having everyone back in the office after a long period of remote and hybrid working. And that's a big change and takes quite a bit of bedding in. We came to the conclusion that for our business and for the well-being of our people, they needed to be in the office. And, those that have opted to come back in all say, yeah, it's much better. It's better for our mental health. It's better for the projects. It's better for our clients. But not everybody wanted to come back, and that was a series of quite tough decisions, which I think a number of businesses are now wrestling with. None of us want to be the ogres that take away people's treats, and most of us quite like hybrid working, but it is a difficult thing to manage in a creative team environment to manage effectively. And what we have found is that if you've got people who have worked together in the office, they can work remotely for a while, but it dissipates. So after 2 to 3 years of working remotely, those strong connections and ties and relationships begin to pull apart, and that collaborative working is less successful. So absolutely, yes, somebody can go and work at home for a day if they need to. But working permanently remote for us doesn't really work. So that's a big change, which we're currently bedding down. Looking forward, we want to grow. As always, everyone always wants to grow. Recruiting has always been very difficult. Finding good people, good, motivated, effective people. I find it incredibly frustrating reading endless threads on LinkedIn from frustrated job seekers saying employers are terrible, there are no jobs, I never get replies to jobs. And I know from my own experience and those of the people I know in the industry that we're crying out for people to come and work with us. And we have tried everything, particularly on our maintenance business, which is now very small because we won't take on people that aren't the sort of people we want in our business. And we find recruiting impossible. The horticultural colleges are pretty much all closed. And there are not trained people with horticultural knowledge and excitement and interest coming into the industry. We can't recruit maintenance people. Landscaping historically has been very, very difficult, but we are recruiting at the moment, and we've had a really good crop of applicants. That's
Good.
changed. And we have actually got some really good applicants.
Good.
So there is some light at the end of the
Yeah.
tunnel, and we're always looking for good, motivated designers as well. And again, that's that's difficult because you want people who are kind of our kind of people who are, you know, excited and motivated and interested. You know, we recruit on attitude more than skill, but we'd
Yeah,
quite like the skill as
absolutely.
well, please.
Yeah, it'd be nice, right? I mean, exactly. We're exactly the same. We do design, and it's very collaborative as it needs to be. And we are in the office 4 days a week, with 1 day at the moment from
Mm,
home. But it's quite fluid. You know, I'm not. In my previous career, you know, when I first came out of school, I worked in the legal sector for a good few years, and there is a very old school bums on seats attitude, and I didn't want that to be part of the culture of my business, because it makes people unhappy first and foremost, and then when you're looking at the business side, it impacts productivity negatively, and just creates an environment that you don't want to work in, basically. And yeah, what you mentioned there about the recruitment and the attitude over perhaps sometimes skill set, that's something that I think not many younger people, I think, appreciate. I think there's a lot of, and I get it, right? You know, you want to be able to demonstrate that you have the potential, or you have the skill set that gives you the potential to be able to be very good in a role. But there is a big part of that, which is your attitude and how you carry yourself.
absolutely.
Because you're working in a team, particularly if you're going to into a business like yours or mine, where you have to collaborate. You're not one person sitting in a corner working off a spreadsheet all day. That's not how it works. So if you're going into a collaborative environment, especially one that's creative, let's say, you have to be able to work and have the sort of, I say, emotional intelligence. I appreciate sometimes I'm reaching maybe there for someone who's young, but, you know, you have to have that potential in you as well. You know, it's not just, you know, it's that what we were saying earlier, Ruth, that book smart and streetwise. And you've got to have a bit of both. And I don't think enough is given to the attitude side of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, you bear in mind that tempers get frayed on some of these big projects. They get frayed on site. You know, some of our biggest project was over £5 million project. You know, you can only imagine the horror of working on a site with 100 people working on it. Most of them were nothing to do with us. Um, a very, very, very difficult client, who made everyone's lives an absolute misery, and everyone was terrified that they were going to get stiffed, I think the term is, at the end of the project. You're putting people in a situation where tempers get frayed, people get upset, people are shouting and swearing, particularly on a building site. You know, they are still like that on occasions, you know, not ours, but, you know, a big site with a main contractor on it can get quite aggressive at times, and you're putting people into that sort of situation. Um, you're putting people in a situation where clients' daily lives go on. You know, we may be working with them sometimes for years. I mean, we've got some projects that, you know, 2 years on, we are still working there. So that their lives go on and they have their ups and downs. And, you know, you're expecting people to continue to deliver on the job, understand some of the client's needs, not always cave to everything. Learning to say no is one of the hardest things, I think, in our business. You know, when you've got so used to it, oh yeah, you know, we'll do that, we'll do that, we'll do that, we'll do that, and you realise that, you know, often it's, well, we'll do that, but we can't do that for free, which is quite a difficult discussion to have with someone. And that whole team environment of trying to put the right people in the right places and to manage it when the wrong person is in the wrong place. So when you've got a relatively less experienced member of a team who happens to have walked into bedlam on a site where a client is shouting and screaming and swearing, um, that is a very challenging environment. And some people rise to it brilliantly and brush it all off and it's fine, and other people find that immensely difficult for understandable reasons. But that whole people dynamic, and as you say, it is emotional intelligence, you know, knowing when to button your lip,
Yeah.
um is probably, you know, I put my hand up and say that's something I've always found quite difficult. But you know, I'm in my 60s now. I can get
You
away
can get away
with
with
a lot
it.
more than somebody in their 20s can. And being honest, you know, it is still the case that whilst I have been shouted at and sworn at and actually physically threatened on a number of occasions by the most surprising people, it doesn't happen very often. You know, people tend not to do it to a woman. They will do it to a man on site. And you know, we have had occasions when one of our project managers in particular has been shouted and sworn at, and you know that is not good for people's mental health. And you know, mental health awareness is something that I think we are all much more familiar with, perhaps not doing as well as we should do. And I think that's another very important thing for our industry, that working outside often is actually a brilliant thing for people who are struggling with mental health issues. And it's definitely a big plus for our maintenance and landscaping crews. I'm not saying they're all a bunch of fruitcakes, but you know, we all have our issues, we all have our crosses to bear, and I think working outside is actually a really, really good thing for people who need a bit of space and need a bit of, you know, not being enclosed by a difficult environment. But we need to be aware of what issues they are and how to deal with them. So, I mean, I think that's a broader than just our industry, but I think managing people's mental and physical well-being is important.
Yeah, definitely. And I think our industry perhaps has been behind the curve, and a lot of industries are guilty of it, particularly those that are perhaps more traditional. For example, you know, I was in the legal world for a good few years, and it's exactly the same, actually, probably worse, because you don't have the benefits of being able to work outside if you want to.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's something that I think is now becoming certainly recognised, and work is being done to improve the working conditions. Not, you know, just the perhaps the situations that some of us can find ourselves in. I think a lot of awareness is around that now, or is coming into it anyway.
I think it's getting better. It's moving. It's moving from tokenism into real world action. You know, I do think there's still a surprisingly complete lack of women on building sites. You know, we have no women in our landscaping team. We would love some women in our landscaping team. We haven't got any, and have never had. You know, we'd absolutely love women to come into our industry. You know, there's no reason why you can't have women in the landscaping industry. It's not all humping and dumping and massive strength work. You know, it's precise, it's creative, it's interesting. You know, we have had women on the maintenance team, and they've always been very successful. We don't at the moment. And most of our designers are women. That our head of design isn't. But I think that some of the gender stereotyping is very outdated in our industry.
Historically, it's always been traditionally men, hasn't it? And it's. I think, from my experience anyway, I feel like there's, and I appreciate we only work for a certain percentage of the industry, if you like, and it's very small because, but clients are very aware of it. Our clients are, their sort of responsibilities and the need for new ideas, fresh talent, diversity in the people they have working for them, in ideas. I think there is awareness there. Whether that is instigating any real change at the present time, I don't know. But there's certain. The reason I say that is we're certainly working with a lot of our clients are aware of it, and we're working with them to sort of how they're positioning their brand and their sort of the tone of language they're using to appeal to different people. But it's definitely, I mean, it's a common theme. I spoke with someone earlier in the week who's they're basically a construction contractor, and she's an operations manager, of a construction company, and she was saying that there are so many different roles and that would appeal to female candidates that are just not there's virtually hardly any uptake for them. And she does a lot of careers fairs and goes to colleges and stuff like that. And there are people there, young men and women, who one had no real idea that construction was even a viable option, and two had a completely, I mean, I suppose maybe it is a fair reflection of the industry, but their thinking behind it is, well, yeah, you just got to be a guy, you're going to go and be a bricklayer. And it's just that sort of that gap, and partly why we're doing this, right, and we've got this podcast, is sort of trying to bridge that gap and show people there's so much variety.
There is, and whilst, you know, some building sites are still, you know, hideous places and probably exactly what you'd imagine, most aren't. Most are highly professional, or, you know, organisations that are, you know, just trying to get a job done. Similarly, you know, you would never have thought in our industry that introducing somebody who's trans into our organisation, you know, working with a bunch of builders who, you know, perhaps are a little outdated in some of their attitude and language. I mean, getting my project managers to refer to someone as them, they, I thought was going to be a massive challenge. And actually, of course, because they're decent people, you know, they, within a day, they'd got a system, and it just became a laugh. And actually, they all got on really well. It was fine. I think they were more anxious about it than they needed to be. It was absolutely, you know, not a problem, because in general, decent people everywhere, whatever their backgrounds and however unfamiliar some of these things are, you know, whether it's women on a building site, or, you know, somebody trans that you've got to remember to get your grammar right. It sort of doesn't matter. Decent people will sort it out. And that's what, as an industry, you know, perhaps we need to be getting across to people is, you know, we may appear dinosaurs, but we're just like everyone else trying to get a job done.
Yeah, I think that is exactly it, Ruth. And I think, you know, the industry is full of knowledge, experience, character, and ultimately good people. And I'm really keen to get that out there. Ruth, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Very, very interesting. And I've really, I'm glad you've enjoyed it. It's been fantastic hearing about your journey. And I hope that we speak again soon. I'm sure we will.
Thanks very much, Jason.
Thank you, Ruth.